It does take a lot of confidence to say, no, we're not going to shut down feelings in our house, for example, or we're not going to do the naughty step. I know that you might have done that, Mum, but the science is what we know has moved on. And I think it's really hard to access that confidence, particularly for first-time parents. But it's also really important. It's really important because when you can access that confidence, it does give you that sense that this is your family now. It's very empowering. And I think when you can get that into yourself, it lowers the stress and it lowers the questioning and it lowers the guilt.
Welcome to the Parenting Truths podcast. Today, I'm joined by Zoe Blaskey, who is founder of Motherkind. She's a mother, speaker, podcaster. So thank you for joining me, Zoe.
Oh, happy to be here.
So the main reason I wanted to chat to you today, you seem to have created this huge environment for support for parents and mothers through the Motherkind, be it your social media content or your podcast, which is super popular. So I just wanted to sort of try and dive a little deep with your own parenting journey, if that's okay, and try and understand what motivated you to go down the route of supporting mothers specifically. So in order to kick off, are you able to take us back to sort of pre-parenting, maybe just before you decided, right, I'm ready to start a family? Sort of where were you and what motivated you to start a family?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't often think about that. So it'll be nice. It'll be nice to reflect on that. I'm not one of those people who always knew that they wanted to be a mother, be a parent. I was quite career driven. I did a lot. I've always been really into learning. So I would always be reading something or studying something or doing a little course in something. I wasn't one of those people who was, and I know some mothers experience this, some parents experience this, like they knew that they always wanted to be a parent and that their life was leading up to that. I didn't feel like that. But I'd got married and my husband did feel like that. We often joked he had wanted to be a dad since he was about 12. Like he was obsessed with the idea of becoming a dad. So we'd only been married a couple of months and he was saying, right, should we try and get pregnant? And it completely freaked me out. I was like, oh my gosh, no, I'm not ready for that. I also, at the time, was really getting into therapy and, I have a lot of pain and trauma in my family of origin. And so I was really trying to work through a lot of that and how that was showing up in me. And I remember saying to him, I'm not ready. I'm so scared that I'll pass all this on. I need another couple of years to work through it all. I had no idea that, of course, having children is like arguably one of the best ways to work through all that, and it accelerates it and turns the volume up on it and all that. So yeah, after about a year of me sort of putting the brakes on, we did get pregnant. We got pregnant really quickly and I instantly felt really happy and not good enough, which was a really interesting place for me to be in. I remember that I'd missed the appointment for the first scan and I was so devastated about it. And I said to Guy, see, I told you I wasn't good enough for this. There was something in me that just felt like I wasn't good enough to be a mother. I wasn't good enough to bring someone into the world, which was my low esteem. And I hadn't learned then about self-compassion. And, there's lots that I didn't know then that I know now through doing all the work on Motherkind. So.
And that impacted all areas of your life before becoming a parent, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like I'd been really driven by external validation because my esteem was so low. That sense of self was so low. And, I've done lots of work, many hours with many different therapists on many types of retreat, figuring out where that is. And I've really transformed that today. I don't feel like that today, which is nothing short of a miracle, to be honest. But yeah, it had really impacted all areas of my life. And I now know, it's really common, sadly. It's more normal, particularly for women, I think, or I think maybe men hide it better, to have that sense of, I'm not good enough. I'm going to be found out in my job. Why do my friends really like me? Oh my God, I just said that. Is that person, have I offended that person? Just that constant sort of sense of not feeling at ease in myself. And what is incredible is that motherhood has given that to me through Motherkind, because I've spoken, like you do, to all these incredible people. But I never had it before. I opted for a home birth, which was the first time ever, I think, that I really went against what was expected of me. Like my whole life, I'd basically done what was expected of me. And trying to have my first baby at home was the first time I really said, no, this is what I want. And it upset a lot of people in our family. They didn't understand our decision. They were really worried about it. So that was really interesting for me early on, in that process of my early matrescence, of the process of becoming a mother, learning about how part of motherhood, part of parenting is figuring out what's important to you and having the balls and the strength and the courage to stand up for it. A lot of my challenges came after the birth. The birth was great, to be honest. And I had this amazing home birth. And yeah, I felt really empowered. I definitely discovered a part of myself that I didn't know was there, which was this really strong, fierce woman. I really didn't know she was in there. And I found her through that process, which was pretty incredible and definitely fed into me starting Motherkind. But I then found those early months really hard going, which I again now know is completely normal. But at the time, and remember, this was 7 years ago, the conversations were really different. There wasn't platforms like yours. There wasn't platforms like mine. I just saw a lot of mums, in newborn photo shoots looking really happy. And I was thinking, this is not how I feel. I feel like I'm completely flawed. And so I just did what I've always done, really, which is look for content, look for people talking about it, look for books, look for workshops, look for talks. And what I found was a lot of chat about what mums should wear, or, is breast best or is bottle best, or, how much gin to drink. The best-selling book when my baby came out was called Hurrah for Gin. And I'd been sober for a long time at this point. So I was like, help, none of this helps me. I can't drink the bloody gin. I wish I could. So I started this sort of seed was planted. So I started just doing my own research about what was going on. I learned about this word matrescence, which essentially is like adolescence, that of becoming a mother. It's meant to be a really bumpy time. It's meant to be hard. You're meant to question everything. Everything gets thrown up in the air. The moment I learned that word, I just completely normalized my experience. I was like, I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm just going through this matrescence. It's just that no one around me is talking about this. No one told me about it. I'd been to tons of antenatal courses. No one had ever mentioned that word or the process. So this sort of seed was planted to start what is now Motherkind. Sorry, that was a very long answer to a very simple question.
That's okay. Lots to unpick there. I think what you're talking about, the realization you had through that first year that a lot of what you're feeling was normal, it would be really important and amazing if expecting parents were given and provided this information. It's perfectly normal that you might feel this way in that first or that fourth trimester or the first year. But yeah, the fact that you were consciously able to sort of own your pregnancy and the birth, despite maybe the noise around the family, is also quite important as well, because I don't think expecting parents have got that level of confidence, especially with their first, to make those decisions that might go against the norm. Even when you're giving birth, I remember with our first, we tried to, like you, learn as much as we could before Luca was born, and we ended up doing a tour of the hospital. We ended up making like quite a detailed birth plan, and I think that gives you a sense of confidence even before the baby's born, and it helps you set those boundaries with people around you that can often lead to a lot of unnecessary stress and pressure when it's already quite a vulnerable time anyway when you're expecting your first baby.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it's almost like an initiation, isn't it, into what's to come? Because I think our generation of parents, and you talk about this a lot, we do know more than we ever knew, even 10 years ago, about parenting and, you know, brain science and brain development. Our generation just know more about that. The studies have come out that are relatively recent, and we have access to podcasts like yours and mine. And so we do things differently to other generations. And I think it does take a lot of confidence to say, no, we're not going to shut down feelings in our house, for example, or we're not going to do the naughty step. I know that you might have done that, Mum, but, you know, the science is what we know has moved on. And I think it's really hard to access that confidence, particularly for first time parents. But it's also really important. It's really important because when you can access that confidence, it does give you that sense that you know, this is your family now. It's very empowering. And I think when you can get that into yourself, it lowers the stress, and it lowers the questioning, and it lowers the guilt. So yeah, it's a really good point that you make about having that confidence, even when things are new and scary. It's holding both of those together.
And I don't know if it's I'm lucky with the people that are around me, or just I'm so vocal with the way I want to parent. People just like my parents and my parents-in-law sort of respect the way myself and my wife want to do things. But engaging with people through the dad vibes, it seems to be a huge issue. Like if you've got someone in your family that is really going against the way you're parenting, or really not respecting the boundaries you're setting, it can be quite debilitating to your day-to-day life. And I receive messages often from parents really struggling with this. So I talk about setting boundaries with those around you quite often, because I think it does open that door to enjoying your parenting journey a lot more often. And it seems to be something that a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, me too. I get messages almost daily like that as well. And I think, you know, it makes sense to me, because I think, you know, imagine if it's our kids and they want to do it completely differently to how we did it. It's really hard. I think you have to have a level of emotional maturity to hold that idea. I did my best and my child wants to do it differently with their children. That is quite a emotionally mature thing to not take on, or get a message of shame or guilt that you did something wrong. You know, and I remember my mum saying this to me, did I do something wrong? And, you know, because I too have been really vocal about how I want to do things differently, you know, and I have a lot of compassion. I said, absolutely not. You did the absolute best you could with what you knew. It's just that we know more. So I'm going to try and do it differently. We just know more in our generation about brain development, and, you know, all these recent studies that have come out, you know, only in the last sort of 20 to 30 years. So it is really new, and we are parenting in a completely different landscape than our parents. You know, our parents didn't have social media. They didn't have WhatsApp groups. They didn't have podcasts. You know, it was completely different, for better or worse. So I think I have a lot of compassion for parents-in-laws, you know, aunties, godparents, whoever it is that find it really confusing. Well, I did that with you. What's the problem? So I think that's the first place I always start. It is to have compassion and to hold the boundary. You can do both. Like, I completely understand why this would be really confusing to you, that you did that with me and I'm choosing to do it differently. I get that, you know, you did the best you could, but we're going to try it this way, and holding that boundary. And that's really hard. And I hear that a lot. I'm sure you do, particularly like if children go away to stay with grandparents and say, you know, someone doesn't want to do naughty step punishment, or they don't want it, you know, hours and hours of screen time a day, or tons of sugar, you know, and then that keeps happening at that person's home, or they keep buying the kids, you know, whatever you don't want them to have. It takes a lot of courage to hold a boundary, and it takes a lot of esteem to hold a boundary. And I think people don't realize that you have to really value yourself as a parent to hold the boundary. It's much easier to go, oh, it doesn't really matter, I'm just going to keep the peace. And I think particularly for people, you know, socialized as women, mothers, I think that is very strong in us. There are lots of studies that prove that little girls are raised to please. We find it much harder to set those boundaries. So it's a real growth edge, and I think it's really important as well, because when we can do that, of course, we're then teaching our kids boundaries. We don't teach our kids boundaries by sitting them down and telling them about it one day. Absolutely not. No, they learn it by watching us. You know, how do mum and dad value their choices? How do they set loving, kind, firm boundaries with the people around them? How do they live true to their values? Like, that is what our kids are watching and learning. So yeah, it's important and hard, I think.
Yeah. And I think the intensity of parenting is now more than ever. I think parents need a lot more support. So if relatives aren't respecting those boundaries, you aren't feeling supported, because we've sort of lost that village a little bit with the way the modern world works. People are focused on their career, they're starting families a little bit later, they move away, and they don't have that network, that family network around them, maybe like they once did. So certainly for us, we have family around and we have support, but I think Luca was 2.5 years before we were ready to let anyone to spend the night away and let anyone look after him. so that was quite intense, but that was just a decision we made. And I think we've definitely lost that village, haven't we, in terms of that support network around us.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I've done quite a lot of work sort of studying this and reading it and really trying to understand it. And it's only in the last 100 years, so it's really recent. It is so recent if you think about, that in the greater perspective of human development. It is only in the last 100 years that we raise our children how we do, outside of, we as you said, we live away from family, we don't have that community support. Our brains are actually not designed to raise children that way. That's not how it was designed at all. We were designed to raise children in small communities of about 50 people. There was this term called allo mother, or allo parent, which is where other people would support in the raising of the children. It really was a community effort. And then if the group got bigger than 50, they would split off and create another group. Now, if you think about how different it is, but our brains haven't changed. I think there's a sort of common misconception that maybe because the world that we live in is so different, that our brains have somehow adapted to handle it. They haven't. We're working with the same apparatus. And then, what tends to happen is, as parents, we tend to beat ourselves up. Oh, I just need to work harder. I just need to do better. I just need to, whatever your ... is. And, I'm really vocal about this because that's where we tend to go. We tend to shame ourselves. And I think it's really important to remember as parents that we're not designed to raise our children like this. It was never meant to be on two people or one person. It's impossible. So that's why, so many parents do feel exhausted, burnt out, guilty, just running on empty, because it wasn't designed to be like this. And I think, particularly if you think about the cost of living crisis, and so many families now more than ever are dual working. And again, the working week was not designed with that in mind. The working week was actually designed so that someone would be at home taking care of the caring responsibilities. And so, and there are lots more people far more educated and vocal about this than me, but I think it's really important that we remember that as parents, because we can't get to a position where we're turning it in on ourselves and thinking that we're doing something wrong. There's lots that we can do. We talked about one of them, which is setting boundaries. There's lots that we can do. But overall, we have to remember that we're working in a system that it's not designed to help us thrive in parenting. It's really not.
Yeah, I think that's why platforms like Motherkind are so important, because when parents do finally get that downtime and they go on social media, I think the parenting social media space can become toxic very quickly. I'm not sure if you're aware, if you feel this as well. And I'm constantly reviewing my content just to make sure what I write is in a non-judgmental way, still giving my opinion, but I don't want parents to be, sat there in the evening trying to get a bit of escapism via their phone and feeling judged or shamed. So I do think that's why platforms on social media, podcasts are so important, just to give parents that support, because often that's the only support they'll receive, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a really fine line tread, to give some of this new information that we know about the importance of parenting, and how powerful it can be to learn about regulating yourself, and how ultimately that is what parenting is about. It's how well regulated we can be as parents. It's a fine line to give that message, but to give it with such compassion. And I've definitely not always got it right, but I think we do quite a good job. And that's why I called it Motherkind, because I could see so much judgment on mothers in particular, and so much judgment of ourselves. And I think we just need to pour compassion over everything. We judge the most where we feel the most insecure. So it's completely unsurprising to me that there is so much judgment in motherhood, because so many of us feel completely insecure about our decisions. So if you decided to do something, I don't know, like bottle feeding from birth, and you see a post that's, talking about how powerful breastfeeding is and breast is best, you're likely to jump into that conversation feeling quite triggered. If you're going to comment, you're going to judge. You might, or you could take that inwards. So I think it's just remembering that often the reason we see so much heated debate on either side of these conversations is because there's so much insecurity and lack of support, which leads to that division and that divisiveness. And of course, you have to remember that algorithm loves that. So you're going to see more content that is more divisive. The posts which are, and I sometimes think, Motherkind on Instagram hasn't grown half as fast as our podcast. And I think that's because I don't tend to engage in a lot of those debates that get the posts shown more, they get the comments going, that get people arguing and fighting or replying back to each other 50 times. That's what puts posts to the top of the feed. So I think it's important remembering that as well. The other side of it, of course, is platforms like yours and mine, are great sources of support, but I think there is a responsibility with creators like you and me and loads of other amazing people who take it really seriously. Unfortunately, not everyone does, but I think we can, it's like anything, we have to take responsibility. If you're using social media, you have to be discerning, you have to remember how it works. You have to, if something's triggering you, unfollow for a while or mute that account. We have to handle it carefully. And I think we are the first generation. I always have to remind myself of this, raising our children with social media. No one has done it before us.
Yeah.
So we're going to make a lot of mistakes. No one knows what we're doing. No one knows the impact of all of this on us or our children. A lot of us are trying to figure out how we want to use it. And, before there's no way you'd be able to see a picture of, your favorite celebrity or influencer every moment of their day. What were they doing with their kids? You'd be lucky if you knew that about your neighbor, as I was saying 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are trying to figure out what it means for our children with no real guidelines or support. So again, I think we just need a lot of compassion for ourselves, that we really do feel like a little bit, we are an experimental generation, I think, in the history of parenting and human development. I think we'll see this time as, there's a lot of stuff being thrown at us that we don't know what we're doing with it.
Yeah. And I think it's really important you said about your growth on Instagram. I'm noticing more and more accounts I really respect are literally sort of lighting that fuse with their posts, creating a polarizing post, whether it's breast versus bottle, co-sleeping versus sleeping on their own. And they know it's going to go off in the comments, and it's like they're purposely doing it. And it just makes the account far less disingenuous, because it's not providing any support for either party. If I was to create a breastfeeding post, because my wife breastfeeds our little one, I'd always lead with, obviously a happy and healthy mother is best for baby. If you choose to breastfeed, here's some support, because obviously there's not that much support on the NHS for breastfeeding mothers. So I find that by writing content like that actually reaches and appeals to those that choose not to breastfeed. Whereas there are accounts that literally once a week, because they know it will spike their engagement, are just lighting that fuse and letting the comments get very, very toxic, which is a shame.
Yeah. And it's always been that way, since the beginning of time in media.
Yeah.
Headlines, you think about newspaper headlines, it's never a balanced headline that sells papers. It's always, looking for that drama, looking for that shock factor. It's always been that way. It's just that we're consuming so much more of it now. It's not just that one paper headline that we would read a day. Often we'll open Instagram in a vulnerable state, a tired state as parents, looking for support. And we might see hundreds of headlines like that are, making us question ourselves. I think you're right, Tom. There are loads of accounts that do it with that in mind, because it does drive engagement. 100% it does. So, yeah, and I think that's where we as the consumers of that just have to take responsibility for how we consume it, because as I see it, the social media organisations aren't doing that yet, and I don't know if we'll ever get to a place where they're stopping that sort of divisive content, because of course that keeps people engaged, it keeps people on the platform for a longer time, which is what the whole objective of particularly Instagram is, to keep you on there. They want you to stay on there as long as possible. And if you're spending 10 minutes replying to a very impassioned, maybe you're triggered, if you're spending 10 minutes replying to that comment, that's exactly what the platform wants. So yeah, we have to be super mindful of it. And if you look at something and you're triggered, I always would say, put the phone down, take a breath, grab a pen and paper or the notes section on your phone and just write out what's coming up for you. It's far more productive to do that than to dive into a debate with some strangers online about it.
Yeah. And also as an owner of an account as well, it's really important. My wife always says there's no chance that she'd ever be able to grow an engaged community, because she herself gets too triggered by comments and she'd be dipping in and out every 5 minutes. And you need to have that sort of level of separation, don't you, if you are going to be a person that wants to grow an engaged community. If you're spending all of your time picking up on these toxic comments and engaging with them, you've got no chance really, because you're just going to lose all of your time to that. So that's a tip for anyone that wants to grow an account.
It's true. It's really true. When I first started, oh my gosh, I was so insecure, and and now when I think about it, it's been amazing really, because I can just see, my intention is very pure. My intention is to support, and people, you can feel energy, you can feel intention behind anything, including a social media post. So I think, I'm lucky. I haven't had terrible experiences, but I'm still relatively small. The podcast is much, much bigger than the Instagram. And I think maybe that's because I do hang back on Instagram a bit. I don't post every day. I'm not in DMs every day. I'm not, because, I have to look after my own emotional well-being first. I wouldn't be very authentic if I was, talking about the importance of that on Motherkind and then, not developing that for myself through trying to talk about that. Do you know what I mean? That would have no authenticity. And, again, Tom, a lot of people do that. A lot of people, I know behind the scenes are completely burnt out sharing messages around self-care. And I made a rule for myself. I would never do that. I really would try and live my message before sharing it. And I think, that cost me.
Yeah.
For sure, that cost me in terms of how quickly I'm able to grow it and how many people I'm able to reach. But it feels really important to me. It feels really important to do that.
So I wanted to dive in, because if you look at your roster of podcast guests, you sort of engage with a lot of people. It's sort of a who's who from the conscious parenting world. So you've got Gabor Mate, you've spoken to Gordon Neufeld, who wrote a book with Gabor Mate, Hold On To Your Kids. Becky Kennedy has been on your podcast. What sort of led you into that world and to start connecting and engaging with these types of people?
It was really, as I shared in my early days of motherhood in the first year or so, I was just looking. I never thought that this would become my job or I would be a content creator, honestly. Like, that was never in my sort of vision for my life. I was just looking for the conversation and I couldn't find it. And increasingly, I was just getting more and more frustrated by the fact that a lot of the parenting content 7 years ago completely disregarded the parent. It was insane to me. I was thinking, how can you talk about calming a child without talking about the parent first having to calm themselves? It just, to me, it felt like it was insane. And I think that's because I'd been in therapy a long time. I'd really started to understand how this works within me. And I thought, this is absolutely mental. And I kept buying these parenting books with a lot of hope and then literally lobbing them in the bin because none of them would talk to how I was as the parent. And I thought, this is bonkers. Like, how can you talk about setting boundaries with your children without first talking about what it takes as a parent to set a boundary? It's like they were saying it, a lot of the parenting books early on that I was consuming would make it seem really easy. So you just say no to your child. Well, for me, I could say no to my child, but the moment they then started pushing up against that, I'd find that really hard to hold that boundary because I wasn't regulated. No one had taught me how to do that. So yeah, it was through frustration, through complete frustration, to be honest with you. And I started doing it for my own research. I started, reading Shefali and Gabor and all these incredible people and lots more. And I was complaining about it to a friend one day, and she said, well, why don't you, all this stuff that you're reading and learning, why don't you start a podcast and speak to them about it? And to be honest, it sounded like an insane idea, as many of the things that we end up doing feel like at the start. And yeah, that is how I got into it. And I've always been good at having courage to ask. So a lot of what I've done is just had the courage to ask. And what I've found is that when you come at things with a passion, which I absolutely have, and I think that shines through every email that I send, every post that I do, I think my passion shines through. And I think my intention shines through of genuinely wanting to support, seeing this gap in how we talk to parents, in particular mothers. And I think that's meant that I've got guests, as you say, I've got arguably the best in the world I've spoken to on these these topics. Yeah, I'm very lucky. Because I sometimes feel like there's no way I should be paid for this job. It's like I should be paying, for how much it benefits me.
Because we're immersed in sort of the world day to day, so I'm sure you're hit with content from the likes of Gabor Mate and Dr. Shefali every single day. But in terms of like the mainstream world, I don't think they're there yet. So like I just see myself with the dad vibes as a messenger. So I really want to try and take this message and pass it on to people just because I know it will help them. Like you say, it's all about just starting with yourself. Once you focus on yourself and you're working on your own emotions and you're able to regulate yourself much better, not all the time, obviously, you're going to snap, then that just opens the door, doesn't it, completely to just enjoying parenting more often.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I feel the same. I am trained in transformational coaching, so I do work with parents, less actually one-on-one now because the platform is so big and busy, but I do lots of corporate work, and I do I run lots of groups, and I like having that expertise that I can actually help people make some of these changes as well. But ultimately the podcast started same as you. It started as there's all this incredible information out there, and I just wanted to be part of this movement that was helping and supporting parents in a far more useful way than I could see was the conversation. I did really find it hard when so much of the conversation was just, this is really hard, let's drink gin to get through it. And I get that, and it's funny, and I like that book, Hurrah for Gin. It's really funny, but it just didn't offer a solution to me, and because I was sober, there wasn't an option for me. I had to find another way, and I think it's really changing now in the parenting landscape. I think the isn't it so hard, the funniness of that is brilliant, and I don't think it's going to go away, and I love content like that. But I think there's also a huge wave incoming which is, and here's some support, and here's what we do about it. And I'm really proud that Motherkind's part of that. That was my mission and an objective.
So, in your work as a transformational coach, was there common themes that you'd find parents would be struggling with, or was everyone quite unique in their own sort of journey?
Yes and no. I mean, everyone's different. Everyone has their own unique histories and things that happened to them when they were young, because of course that's when our sense of self gets set up in the first 7 years, and we know that now. So everyone had, those unique experiences. And yet the converse is also true, that I would see the same sort of thing time and time again, which would be, guilt, shame, lack of confidence, lack of a sense of self, feeling like they can't set boundaries, low worth, so really struggling to look after themselves, not having been taught about feelings and emotional health, and really wanting to do that now for the next generation. So that's what I coach on. I also coach lots of really successful mothers about how to find that blend and boundaries between work and motherhood, and ambition and motherhood, and how that intersects. So that's a lot of the work that I do with organizations and very senior mothers, predominantly in those organizations. So yeah, but it feels like such a privilege, coaching, because it's different than therapy in that it's quite quick. So you
Yeah.
tend to work with someone like me for a couple of months, and the transformations that I've witnessed my clients go through is incredibly humbling. It really is. It really is mind blowing, and it's such a gift in coaching, because really quickly you get people to take those masks off. The masks that we all wear, which is I'm fine and it's good and it's okay, I'm doing
Yeah.
fine. Very quickly you get to what's really going on, and that's such a privilege to be able to hold that space. I absolutely love it. I wish I could clone myself so that I could do more one-to-one work, but I can't at the moment. So we're building up an associate coaches for Motherkind, so that people can still get one-to-one support when they need it, through a series of different coaches with different specialisms that I would have done some training with. So that's what we're doing, because there's such a demand for it out there. It's just that I can't get to it anymore with everything else we've got going on.
And I don't think there's anything else like it in the world, like the transformation of a mother, in terms of even when you're pregnant, giving up your body, having to pause your career, having to just be expected to spend at least the first year with the child. Like, there's so much change there. Maybe a change of network of friends, something that I know a lot of mothers experience when you might be the first in your group of friends to have a baby. There's so much change. I don't think enough credit, or it's not talked about enough in terms of what new mothers have to experience right from the moment they're pregnant.
Yeah, you're right, and it's worse than that, Tom, because we're told we have to bounce back. So the
Yeah.
definition of bounce back is to recover quickly from a setback. So that is what we are telling
Right.
mothers they have to do. You have to recover really quickly from this setback, which just happens to be your child. Arguably the most important relationship you will ever have. I think that whole bounce back, and what's interesting is we're the generation of mothers that grew up consuming that bounce back message and that bounce back media. We're the generation of mothers who watched, Posh Spice be weighed live on TV, after the birth of her first child 20 years ago, to see if she'd lost the baby weight yet, live on TV. So we are the generation of mothers that were consuming that, were watching that, and I think that really plays into how much we have to fight against what's going on internally and externally with this idea, okay, I've had the baby, I've got to get back as soon as I can. And lots of mothers say to me, I feel like I don't know myself anymore, I've lost my identity. And I say, that's right, you have, because you're going through your matrescence. It's like adolescence. The point of it is that you have lost your identity. Your core values, of course, are still there, but you're not that same person. You've been through a huge life-altering, transformational thing, which is bringing life into the world. And that's because people struggle with that so much because we've been telling mothers and parents that they have to bounce back. They have to, as quickly as possible, get rid of any evidence that they were carrying a baby, get back to work as quickly as possible, get back to how they were before as quickly as possible. Like, that is the whole objective. That's what we've been told. And, it really does us a disservice. It really, really, really does. Because it's not like that at all. As everyone that's ever been through it knows, it's just not like that. But when you're told that's how it's meant to be and that's how you're meant to feel, that's when this gap starts to emerge between how you feel, which is what I experienced, how you feel and how you think you're meant to feel. And the bigger that gap, the more you feel like you're failing. And that is not the case. You're not failing. You are going through your matrescence. And fathers go through the same thing, of course. So yeah, I feel quite strongly, as you can tell, about the bounce back narrative and how damaging it is.
And it's because I was chatting to a dad recently, and his wife, who was quite heavily pregnant, was really struggling, and the judgment, it felt, had already started in the workplace. She was surrounded by a lot of older females, and essentially they told her just to get on with it. We've all had a baby, but she was really struggling with sickness. She wanted some time off, and they were like, absolutely not. We've all done it. You wait till you hit menopause, I think the term they said was, which was heartbreaking to hear because, she hasn't even had the baby yet and already it started,
Yeah. Yeah, it's really common that we live in a society generally, particularly in the UK, I think, where we're not taught how to hold other people's struggles or pain. So what we do is we just try and shut it down as quickly as possible. And that's what I suspect those people were doing. I always think about things with a lens of compassion. I suspect that they just haven't got the skills to sit that mother down and say, tell me about what's going on. Because it is really hard to listen to another human's pain without wanting to shut it down. It's the same with our kids, right? We want to say to them, you'll be fine, you'll have a great day, off you go. And that's essentially what those women were doing to that mum. You'll be fine, you'll be great, off you go. It's because we haven't got the skills to say, tell me about what's going on. Let me hear your pain. Because holding space with someone, in coach training, I often joke it's a year long and you spend about 8 months of it learning that one skill, which is, can I hear someone else's struggles without having to come up with a solution or tell them it doesn't matter or minimize it or send them away? So I think, we need to help people do that more effectively so that there isn't that sense of shutting down or you wait until, when someone says, oh, I'm really tired. And then someone will say to you, oh, wait until they get to be teenagers, then you'll know real tired. Or, that's because we find it really hard, I think, to hold other people's struggles because we want to fix it. We want to find a solution. And unfortunately, a lot of people do that by either offering unsolicited advice, which there is tons of when you become a parent, or they'll try and minimize it to shut you down, to make you stop bringing difficult feelings, to make you put your mask back on, which is, I'm fine, everything's fine. So yeah, I think it's really common, and it's definitely a societal challenge.
And it can make you feel inadequate, can't you? Certainly the wait until, I remember when we were expecting our first, it was, you wait till he's born, you won't get any sleep. And then once we found our groove and we clearly got a handle on things, you wait till you have another. And like you say, you wait till they're a teenager. Like, no one can just sort of just be with you and just acknowledge that, yes, what you're going through is tough, no sleep and whatnot. So, you make a very good point.
Yeah, I think it's a skill. That's what it is. It's just a skill, like a new language. It's a skill that you have to learn. It's the same in parenting. I know you talk about a lot of this, Tom. It's really hard when your child comes to you with a problem. As a parent, you just want to make it better. It's really hard to go, tell me about that. Like, my daughter had something the other day at school, and someone had been really mean to her. Everything in me wanted to march down to that school and, tell the teacher and, get this kid removed. I go straight to that. sort of lioness place. And that's not helpful. That's not teaching my little girl anything about resilience or how to handle challenges. That's just me wanting to fix it all for her. And it's really hard, to
Yeah.
sit there and go, tell me about that. How did that feel? To give her the gift of trying to figure it out a little bit herself and come alongside her, because that is what develops emotional maturity and resilience and confidence and all the stuff that we want in our kids. That is what develops it, not not fixes and whatever else we might try to do as parents. And it's a skill. Like, I can only do that because I've spent so long doing different coach trainings. That's the only reason I can do it. And I think it would be incredible if we could somehow teach more parents that skill, because when we can hold space, my little girl ultimately came up with her own idea of what she was going to do, and that I could see the confidence and the esteem rising in her as she came up with that, and I'll ask her later tonight how it went, and then we'll work through it. Whereas for me, my mum didn't have those skills, so everything was minimized or fixed for me, which is hard when you become an adult, because you go into adult life expecting, you come against the challenges and you don't know what to do, so you go to fixes like, numbing with your phone or drinking, which was what I did a lot, which is why I don't drink anymore, or whatever it might be.
Okay.
Whatever it might be, that's where you go to if you can't hold your own challenges because you were never taught to do it. So yeah, I think that validation piece that you talk about is really important.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things parents can do is just developing the ability just to listen and just validate how their child's feeling. Because, like you said, Lucas had a few incidents at school where you just want to sort of steamroll in and fix it for him. So when he was going through it, as soon as he came out of school, I would sort of just pounce on him and say, what happened? How did it go? What did they do? And that just wasn't working at all, because he shut down. He doesn't want to vocalize how he's feeling. So just stepping back, giving him that space, letting him vocalize it when he's ready. And randomly, he's only 5, so he certainly can't play the guitar, but he started picking up a little small guitar we've got for him, strumming and just chatting about his day at school. And just by letting him do that, he's just providing us with so much information he would never tell us off his own back. So now in the evenings, sometimes he will pick up his guitar and we just get a cool insight into his day, which has been amazing for both me and my wife.
That's really cute. Yeah, because it's so counterintuitive. It's so counterintuitive. It feels like our job as parents is to fix. And, sometimes it is, depending on what it is, of course. But generally, it is to listen. And generally, it is to, in coaching, we call it hold space, which is why I keep using that phrase, which is essentially to let someone talk it through, come up with their own ideas about it and come up with a solution, because that's how you build esteem, right? That's what it is. Esteem is like, I trust that
Absolutely,
I can handle stuff in my life. And if you take that opportunity away, even when they're little, you're just missing an opportunity to start growing that muscle of I can handle life's challenges. Because one thing for sure is that, the next generation are going to be facing a lot of challenges. There's a lot coming down the line that we don't even, particularly when I think about AI, we don't even know what impacts that going to have at all. That they're going to have to face a lot of challenges. So I think, that's one of the best things we can help them do. But we can only do that if we take a beat and just think, okay, I'm not going to dive in and fix here. I'm just going to listen. And sometimes, it's just as simple as asking, tell me how that felt, or okay, so what happened then, or and what did that person say? Just asking a lot of questions. And it's really hard.
Yeah.
It sounds so easy, doesn't it? It's really hard in reality not to go, what? She said, what? That's ridiculous. You're not that. You're beautiful, or whatever. But it, and it isn't just me saying this. Obviously, this is, far greater minds than me have studied this and proven of what a powerful skill it is to develop resilience and esteem, is to just be validated and be allowed to come up with your own solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So to close out, I've got 3 quick fire questions. Previous guests have said they're not that quick fire, so just see how you get on with them, if that's okay.
You're like me. I
So
don't really do small
question.
talk.
Oh, really? So this isn't what type of coffee you like. This is a little bit deeper, but we'll try and keep it quick fire. So knowing what you know now, what parenting advice would you give yourself before you became a parent?
To expect it to be a bumpy time, particularly that first year.
Okay.
Expect that.
Yeah.
And then I think anything else is a bonus.
Yeah. And what's the one thing you feel you need to work on personally as a parent?
Boundaries. I
Yeah.
still find it really, like, if one of them will say, can we have another show or something? And I'll say, no, time to turn it off. And then I'm tired and, maybe
Yeah.
dysregulated, under-resourced. And I'll be like, please, 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 for like 20 minutes. Because my kids, because I haven't always been amazing at holding them, they push and push and push and push. I'm getting way better. 90% of the time now, I'll be like, no, that's it. But sometimes I'll go, oh, go on then. So I really want it to be 100% that I mean what I say. That's what I'm working on.
Yeah. And it is a lot more difficult the older they get. Now, at the time I thought it was difficult, but when Luca was 3, knowing what he's like now as a 5-year-old, far more intelligent, far more developed, it's a lot harder to have those battles with him because he comes up with creative ways to get around them. So
Exactly. And then I find myself saying, because I said so, and I'm like, oh my God, I remember my mum saying that to me and how infuriating that was. So yeah, I've got quite an intelligent little 7-year-old who will come up with or she'll say, well, last Thursday at 3:00, you said this, and it will contradict what I'm saying on that day. So I'm like, okay, great that you've remembered that, but today's a different day. It takes a lot of energy, and I think that's really what is, that frustration that I felt with all the parenting content is that it never recognized how much energy, time it takes to do this. It is so much easier to go, sure, have the chocolate, have the TV. It's so much easier. If you're a solo mom or you're a solo dad, you're under-resourced, you're under-supported, you're tired. I think that's what frustrates me a lot about the parenting conversation is it doesn't recognize how hard it is to do what we know is the right thing to do. Of course we know it's the right thing to do to say something and mean it. Everyone knows that. It's obvious, right? But I think it's much harder to do in practice. And I think that's why it's so important to have compassion for ourselves, and to know that imperfect is good enough, to be honest. And yeah, good enough is good enough.
And I think it's nice to have, certainly through the dad vibes, I get a very quick insight into how other parents are feeling. Because a few times, well, quite often me and my wife look at each other and like, are we doing something wrong? Is parenting this hard for everyone? And by, having the dad vibes and putting out question boxes, engaging, it's like, oh yeah, okay, no, what we're experiencing is completely normal.
Yeah, exactly. But it's funny, isn't it, how on a platform like yours and mine, people will share that. But at the school gate, no one really talks about that. Like if you judged it on this, maybe your school's different. My school, everyone looks like they're nailing it. I'm like, oh my God. So it's only when I then go online, that evening, and I'm chatting with my community, and everyone's like, I'm dying. This is so hard, that I get that validation. I think it's really important to remember that. I think the other thing is that if you are finding parenting really hard, that's often a sign that you are breaking cycles. You are doing things differently. You are holding those boundaries. To parent well takes an awful amount of energy. It's really, really, really hard. So I try and remember that for myself as well. Like maybe I'm finding this really hard and extra exhausting because I really want to develop emotional health in my kids. I didn't have that. So I'm essentially developing it in myself and in my kids at the same time. And that is really hard. It's like trying to learn a language and teach a language at the same time when you're already knackered. under-resourced and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think just remembering that if you're finding it hard, it's because it is hard, and to go easy with yourself about that.
Yeah. The school example you gave is quite a good one. I remember when it was just Luca, so we just had one. Me and my wife used to do the school drop-off together pretty much every day because we both worked from home, and we'd struggle to get him out the door. We'd get him at school, and then you'd have like a mum stroll in. They've got someone in reception, but they've also got a baby strapped to them and a toddler. And we're like, what's going on here? We must be doing something wrong. But I'm sure she's got her struggles as well.
100% she would have done. She's probably on the inside is, muttering swear words to herself. But we do tend to smile and go, I'm fine. Great, all good. Have a great weekend. Yeah, it was amazing. I think, online, funnily enough, like people are more honest, particularly on accounts like yours and mine, where people know that we're going to work hard to validate that. We're not going to judge. We're not going to shame. We're going to not allow other people to do that to each other, because that's the type of platforms that we run. So I think, it is such a gift, isn't it, really, to be able to see. I talk about peeking behind the curtain, like peeking behind the curtain,
Absolutely,
looking behind the mask of what it's like, because then I don't feel like I'm doing it wrong. I just feel like I'm part of, everyone's experiencing it, to some extent the same way.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for joining me today, Zoe. I've got so many questions I didn't get to, so we'll definitely schedule in another chat. And I think I've got a date booked in to chat to you on your podcast, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yes, we do. I'm looking forward to that.
But yeah, there was a lot I wanted to chat to. Obviously, we didn't really get to your podcast and how that has grown exponentially. So we can touch base about that next time. But thank you very much for joining me.
You are welcome. Thank you again.